It was the summer of 1945. The Pacific was dying. Cities burned. Fleets lay in ruins. Japan, once the empire of the rising sun, was surrounded, starved, and broken. And yet, in secret, deep beneath the waves, Japan was preparing one last move. A mission so audacious, so desperate, that it bordered on madness. It was to be their final hope. A weapon that could strike at the very heart of America, even as the empire itself was crumbling. That weapon was a submarine, but not just any submarine. It was called the I-400, a steel leviathan the size of a cruiser, capable of sailing halfway around the world and carrying aircraft inside its hull. While most submarines were hunters, this one was a carrier. It could surface, launch bombers into the sky, and then vanish back into the depths before anyone even knew it was there. It was the largest submarine ever built during the Second World War. And it was born from desperation. By late 1944, Japan's navy was shattered. The battleships that once ruled the Pacific were gone. Oil was gone. Hope was gone. But in Tokyo, a handful of admirals refused to surrender. They believed that one decisive strike, one shock to the American heart, could still change everything. Their idea was unthinkable. If Japan could somehow bomb New York, Washington, or the Panama Canal, it might force the United States to reconsider invasion. And so, the plan was born. To build submarines that could carry bombers across the ocean and strike where Japan's surface fleet could never reach. At Kure Naval Arsenal, construction began in total secrecy. Only a few thousand men even knew what they were building. Each I-400 was 400 feet long, twice the size of anything the Allies had. It carried 3 aircraft, the HE-M6A, Seran, or Mountain Haze. These planes were designed for one mission: suicide strikes launched from the sea. They could fold their wings, fit inside watertight hangars, and be armed with torpedoes or 800-kilogram bombs. The submarines could travel around the world, strike, and disappear. To the men who worked on them, the I-400s were called miracle ships. To the admirals, they were Japan's last ace. In early 1945, 2 I-400s, I-400 and I-401, were completed. Their mission? Operation Oroshi, a top-secret plan to sail east, cross the Pacific in silence, and attack the American fleet anchorage at Ulithi Atoll, the staging ground for the invasion of Japan. If successful, they would destroy hundreds of ships in a single night. Each submarine carried a crew of over 140 men. They were told little about their mission, only that it could change the fate of the empire. In their cramped, airless quarters, they prepared for what might be Japan's final strike. But as they set out, the world around them was already changing. By the time they were at sea, Hiroshima had been erased by an atomic bomb. 3 days later, Nagasaki followed. Japan's war was already lost. Yet deep under the Pacific, the crews of the I-400 and I-401 didn't know. They were still sailing east, toward their target, toward history, carrying the last hopes of a dying empire. Then, On August 15, 1945, everything changed. They received a transmission, strange, uncertain, almost unbelievable. The Emperor had spoken. Japan had surrendered. For the first time in history, the voice of Hirohito was broadcast to his people and to his navy. The war was over. Their mission was canceled, and the men of the I-400 class were ordered to surface and surrender. But surrender did not come easily. Some officers refused to believe it. Others wept. A few talked of carrying out the mission anyway, even if it meant dying alone in the Pacific. In the end, duty prevailed. The submarines rose slowly from the depths, white flags painted on their conning towers. American destroyers surrounded them, guns ready. When the U.S. sailors boarded, they couldn't believe what they saw. Giant submarines capable of carrying aircraft, something no one had imagined. One American officer called it a battleship that could dive. Another simply said, "This changes everything." The U.S. Navy immediately seized the I-400s and towed them to Hawaii. There, engineers studied their design in secret. For a few months, the submarines sat quietly in Pearl Harbor, ghosts of an empire that no longer existed. But their story didn't end there. In 1946, when tensions with the Soviet Union began to rise, the Americans made a decision. They didn't want these technological marvels falling into the Soviet hands, and so the I-400 and I-401 were taken out to sea, their hatches sealed, and their crews removed. Then the U.S. Navy torpedoes were fired. The submarines, Japan's last hope, sank silently beneath the waves off the coast of Hawaii. Their exact locations were kept classified for decades. It wasn't until the early 2000s that deep-sea explorers rediscovered them, preserved like time capsules on the ocean floor. Inside, everything was still there. The folded aircraft, the launch rails, even the Imperial insignia. Silent witnesses to a dream that never came true. Today, the I-400s remain a haunting reminder of the extremes of human ingenuity and desperation. They were built not for victory, but for hope. Hope that somewhere, somehow, one last act of defiance could change the course of fate. But in the end, the submarines never launched a single bomb. They never reached American shores, and their mission, Japan's final throw of the dice, vanished into the depths with them. Perhaps that is the quiet truth of it all. That wars are not only lost in battlefields or cities, but in the silent places, deep beneath the ocean, where the last dreams of empires sink unseen. The I-400s carried more than aircraft. They carried belief. And when they sank, that belief went with them. The submarines that vanished after carrying Japan's last hope never fired a shot, but they remain one of history's most haunting symbols of brilliance born in despair.